Welcome to those of you that are just coming in. I decided we'll wait until 10:02 to get started, which should be just a moment. All right, it is 10:02. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to say good morning to everybody and thank you for joining us today. I hope your Wednesday's off to a good start. This is the Accessing and Using Data to Improve Your McKinney-Vento program training. Quick note about last week's training. Attendance has been verified in PD Enroller. So if you're still interested in receiving clock hours for attending, I encourage you to take the course evaluation in PD Enroller, and then you'll be able to get your clock hours for that. If you missed last week's training, but you're interested in viewing it, should have the recording posted to the waOSPI McKinney-Vento site in just a few weeks. I encourage you to check it out after it gets posted. There's a lot of good information about the Healthy Youth Survey. But yeah, probably 3 weeks, hopefully, is when I should have it up there. Looking at today's attendance, I see we have a lot of repeat attendees, but for those of you that I have not introduced myself to before, I'll take just a moment and introduce myself again. My name is Zach Dowling, and I'm the McKinney-Vento Training Program Supervisor here at waOSPI. I'm new to waOSPI, and I've been here for about 2 months. And then prior to joining the McKinney-Vento team, I was a teacher in the Lake Washington School District for about 2 years, or 10 years rather. And then I also have a background in training and development, which is what led me to working for waOSPI. I'm going to start off today just a little bit different than last week, sticking in that theme of getting to know each other. I want to take a moment and get to know you all just a little bit. And how I want to do that today is in the form of a Zoom poll. It's just 3 questions. It's anonymous. It's very low stakes. If you could take like 10 seconds to answer those questions, that would be great. I'm going to go ahead and start this poll. So I just launched the poll, and I'll give people, I don't know, 30 seconds to a minute. And it's just for fun, just getting to know you. You can see the 3 questions on there. Hopefully you can. And if you're looking at that last question, how much are you looking forward to summer break? If you're like me and you don't get a summer break anymore, just pretend that you get one and then you could answer it accordingly. I know, thinking back, this was always a exciting time of year because everybody, myself and students, would be counting down the days. Been doing the poll for about 50 seconds. I'll go for maybe 20 more seconds and then I'll end it. Sarah's counting 16 school days. Yes, that is always a fun countdown. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and then I'll share the results. And if I hit share the results, hopefully you can see those results. It looks like 44% of the people who chose to fill out this poll are the 0 to 1 year. 26% is over 7 years. So we have a good mix. I think this is nice to be able to see, like, out of the people in this room, for me, it's helpful to know like how many people may have seen this type of training before, but also for you all to see like, oh, where do I kind of stand with for experience-wise with my colleagues? How familiar are you with Tableau? 48% heard of it but never used it, and then very few people use it regularly. And then the last question, I thought this might play out this way. 52%, I was ready for it last week for summer break. So yeah, I get it. I appreciate you all taking the time to do that. Just something, like I said, to get to know you a little bit better. All right, so I'm going to be facilitating the training today, and our subject matter experts are Christina Indris from the National Center for Homeless Education and Amy Scott German from Student Information at OSPI. Christine and Amy, if it's okay with you both, I'll go ahead and have you do formal introductions at the start of your sections of the training. But I do want to acknowledge that we are very lucky to have you all here today to share your knowledge with us. So thank you both for your work on this. Just a quick note regarding everybody's Zoom identifier. Just like last week, if you could please make sure your Zoom identifier is your first and last name. This will allow for me to easily cross-reference today's attendance with PD enroller registration, which translates to the clock hours. These next few slides, I'll show you how to change your name in Zoom if you don't already know how to do that. Oh yeah, closed captions, they are available. If you would like them, you can click on the Zoom toolbar under closed captions, and you should have the option to show subtitle. And name change, if you could make it again, your first and last name. And the way that you're going to do this is in the Zoom toolbar. If you click on participants, you should see an option that says more. And then after you click on more, you should see an option that says rename. And then if you could change your Zoom identifier to your first and last name, it makes it a lot easier for me. I'll give you just a moment to do that. All right, thank you for those of you that updated your Zoom identifier. I do want to take just a minute to remind everybody of the vision, mission, and values of OSPI. If you're not familiar with some of the things that guide OSPI's work, please take a moment to read through this slide. And then while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and drop a PDF copy of today's training in the chat right now. So 1 second, you should see today's slides, today's presentation. Again, it's in PDF format. All right, the PDF version of today's training is now located in the chat. As we go through the presentation today, if we move through something too quickly, or you just wanted to look at a slide longer than we stay on it, you will have access through that PDF in order to look at the content today at your disposal. This is OSPI's equity statement. I'll go ahead and read the first bullet point to you. Ensuring equity goes beyond equality. It requires education leaders to examine the way current policies and practices result in disparate outcomes for our students of color, students living in poverty, students receiving special education and English learner services, students who identify as LGBTQ+, and highly mobile populations. The last bullet point on this slide, I think, fits well with our work here today. The stuff that we're going to go over and the things that we'll be focusing on, I think lends itself nicely to our focus on equity and being advocates for marginalized people. So the work you all do is very important, and recognizing the importance of equity and ensuring equity is crucial. So thank you all for leaning into this work. Here's our goals for today. Our goals for today is that by the time you leave, you know where new data sources live and how to access these data sources, and hopefully use the data to target areas of improvement in serving your students. Additionally, I hope everybody leaves today's training with a better understanding of data workbooks and also knows how to access district Tableau workbooks and other OSPI data sources. Here's what the agenda looks like. Christina is going to start us off with a data overview and best practices. She'll have some really good information on what our data might be telling us that we could be missing. And then Amy will take over after that, and she'll be taking us through available data resources and providing an overview of how to access Tableau, and also providing a few tips on how to use that software. And then we should have time for questions and answers at the end of the session today. If you have questions as we move through the material, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then I can convey them to Christina and Amy as they come in. Amy and Christina might also prompt for questions as they go through their presentations. And so you can feel free to raise your hand and unmute and ask the question then as well. So I know this slide is a little bit busy, but if you bear with me for a moment, I want to give you a little context behind this. So I'm currently taking really good professional development from an organization that's called Bright Morning. And the focus of this PD is all about effective facilitation and design. And one of the things we recently covered was the notion of explicitly calling out the purpose and addressing the why. This concept really struck me as something like, I should probably be doing this in my own trainings that I provide. And I think that sometimes I assume that since I'm working with adult learners, that everyone inherently, just picks up on the purpose of or why of a specific training. And I think my thought process is typically, well, I stated my goals, I showed an agenda, we should be good regarding the purpose of the day. And I know, and I'm sure there are times when learners inherently do pick up on the purpose through goals and agendas. But I also know from my own experience that I've sat through many PD over the years where I left the training not knowing the purpose of what I just sat through. And then, of course, when I was in the classroom as a teacher, I'd get the why question all the time. So this graphic on the screen is really just reframing the goals to answer why questions and to build a coherent purpose statement. I'm trying to be intentional with calling out the purpose of today and answering the whys, because I know for me, sometimes I would lose sight of it and I would just miss it all, or I would just miss it altogether. So I hope this is helpful in grounding our purpose for today. I'll go ahead and read the final purpose statement real quick, and then we'll move on to the next slide. When we have a better understanding of the data and its implications, we can better serve our students. Understanding that there are various tools and systems at your disposal are crucial in doing this. Using a data visualization tool like Tableau can be helpful to access and display data in a meaningful way, which again can help us in serving students and families. Just checking the chat right here. Awesome. Thank you all for throwing in your tribal land acknowledgements. And that is actually what I'm going to do next. So before we get started on the content today, I want to take a moment for a tribal land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still inhabit the area today. I'm joining you today from the traditional tribal lands of the Cowlitz tribe. If you'd like to acknowledge the land you are joining from today, please feel free to add your tribal acknowledgement in the chat feature. I'll go ahead and leave about 30 seconds on the board for those of you that would like to do so. And then after that, I will hand it over to Christina. All right, thank you for those that participated in that. And Christina, the floor is yours.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And thank you too for the reminder to introduce myself, because I would have forgotten to do that. So I'm Christina Endries. I'm with the National Center for Homeless Education, and I am tickled that I have known your state coordinator, Melinda Dyer, since I started this work as a state coordinator for the state of Indiana, which is where I'm coming to you from today. And over the years, I moved from that state coordinator's position to the National Center. And a lot of the work that I do there is general TA, but a lot of it also specifically focuses in on our data projects and helping people understand and use data, which is what I am here to help you all do today. I know that this can be a really overwhelming topic for people. And I know that it can feel like one of those things that we have to do because somebody says we have to do it, and it's really disconnected from our work. And so part of my goal in terms of like aligning with what Zach was showing us is to help you think about your data and how that can then help you change things when working with your students and setting up your program. So the very first thing I want to do is, for one thing, point out the fact that a lot of times we think that going to data is going to give us all of the answers, right? So if we just know our data, then we will know all of the super secrets of the world that we need answers to. But actually, a lot of times, data is more about raising those questions. And so the main question that it comes back to is what's happening and why. So it can give you kind of the red flag areas of interest where maybe you need to ask those why questions. But part of the reason I say this is partly because if you come to it thinking that it's going to have all of the answers for you, then that can make you feel like you're failing at data. And so really just understand that it's about piquing your interest and showing you the path towards where the why questions are, because that's where the potential for growth and change is. So to help you with some of that too, I know identification in particular, in quote unquote normal times, identification is always the first burning issue when working with students who are experiencing homelessness, because of course they're so highly mobile. And so that's always the case. In the last couple of years, that's obviously been of even more concern as we've had so much instability within our schools themselves. And so I want to give you a couple of parameters for that. This is based on national data. So the first bullet point is looking at all of the students who are enrolled in public schools in our entire country. How many of them experienced homelessness? And the answer to that is 2.5% of our students. If we then take another look a different way, because sometimes it's good to have multiple ways of looking at it to make sure that you're really hitting the targets that you're going for. So if we look at those students who were free lunch eligible, and we use that as the denominator, and we use the count of students who experienced homelessness as the numerator, then that comes out to 5.8% of students. So when you look at your district and you look at your data for your students, the question then is, how do you compare to these numbers? Do you hit the target for both of those? Do you hit the target for one of those? Are you under both? And so that can tell you right away how you're doing in terms of identification and give you a sense of how close to finding all of the students that we really are. Another thing to note is there are a couple of places in the course of our history, since we've collected data, that you're going to see where there are dips in the counts of homeless students. We saw that for 1920. We saw it, well, we're likely to see it again for 2021 data, right? So just based on what we know that we've all gone through over the last couple of years. Having said that, though, normally the only reason the data dips when we're looking at counts of students who experience homelessness is because there was some sort of massive natural disaster. For example, the first time we saw that dip was after Hurricane Katrina, because Hurricane Katrina happened, it caused a lot of homelessness, and then we recovered from that. And so after those really particularly bad natural disaster years, we tend to see those ups and downs. I know you guys have experienced a lot of wildfires, so you may be seeing some of that in your districts for that reason. The only other reason why data typically goes down on these students is because there was some sort of technology issue. Like, I know from talking to Melinda, you guys have had some changes in terms of how you report your data. And so people may not realize where the checkboxes are or how you have to submit something. And so that's really important to be up on that, because it can impact our data in a false way, because the kids are there. It's just how we record it. So given all of the issues, though, all of that stuff, economic downturns, booming economics, all of those different things, if I look at the data since going all the way back to 2004-05, each year, on average, our homeless student population has increased by 5% each year. So again, that's something else. If you aren't experiencing one of those things where wildfires impacted your community, so you saw a big spike and then a big decrease, if that's not what's happening for you, and you are seeing your population of students who are experiencing homelessness shrink, it's probably an identification issue. And so then we would need to look at that and think about that. Now, this is national data. What it looks like in individual states and in individual communities, obviously does give some parameters to look at and get a sense of, is this good? Is this bad? What's going on? We can go ahead and move to the visuals. I know I'm a very visual person. I tend to talk in pictures too and describe things in pictures. So I wanted to give you guys some pictures. And I want to give you a second too to find your location on the map. I know that it always takes me a second to find my county. What this is, if you are looking at this in your state or your county, your district, actually, your school district is grayed out. That means that your count of students was less than 10 because we have to suppress those counts of less than 10, right, for privacy reasons. So if you see that your school district is on here and it's causing you a little bit of panic because it's gray, that's why it's grayed out, is that you had less than 10 students. You guys had a little bit of improvement with this is because we did this webinar last year. I looked at last year's count of things. And so 274 LEAs previously had reported at least one homeless student, and 219 reported enough to be included in this map, so 10 or more. But for 1920, that jumped up to 282 LEAs reported at least one homeless student. So from 274 to 282, so an increase of 8 districts. And 223 reported at least enough students to be included in this map. So that's an increasing, which is consistent with the trends that I just talked about. But I also want to give you guys some shout out, like that's not just economics, that's the work that you have done. So yeah, we can go ahead and move on, perfect. So this is, you know, that 5.8% that I talked about, students who are experiencing homelessness compared to students who are free lunch eligible. That's what this map is. And the ones that are showing up on here, I filtered this to only show those districts that identified at least 5.8% of their students in comparison to their free lunch data. So you can tell there's a lot more gray on this one, right? We did improve some here too. 154 LEAs met the threshold in 1819, but that jumped to 154 in 1920. And then we can go ahead and look at the next map too. And this is that all student comparison, that 2.5%. So what you see is that we're progressively getting more and more white on the screen. And so I just wanted to show that to you as a visual way to represent what those applying those two parameters can start to look like. We did have some improvement here too. 149 districts met the threshold in 1819, but 153 districts met the threshold in 1920. One thing of note, if you are a charter school representative on the phone today, we saw an increase in the number of charter schools who were reporting homeless students and reporting larger numbers of homeless students. So that's great. That's fantastic. And the charters are these little circled dots that you see on the screen. So again, this is just a way to provide that visual representation of why those different parameters matter, because it's not just that we want to say that we identified a homeless student, right, or some homeless students. We want to really truly try to get all of the homeless students that we possibly can, because we know how that can help them in terms of school and supports that they can then receive as a result of being identified. We can go ahead and move forward.
I have a quick question from Amanda Gonzalez.
Okay.
You may or may not know the answer, and if you don't, then I will certainly find it for Amanda. The question is, do the free and reduced lunch forms carry over, or is it something each family should fill out annually?
Well, so for my purposes, and Melinda and Zach, you jump in if you think that I'm not doing a great job answering here, or actually, Amy, you may be the best person to answer this. The data set that I used for that is the direct certification or the categorically eligible students. And so your homeless students actually don't need to fill out a form at all. We just need to add them to a list, and the liaison needs to sign off on that list. And it needs to provide the student's name and the date of their identification, and then the liaison signature. Get that over to your director of student nutrition, and they will be good to go for this entire school year.
Thank you. That was
okay.
Yeah, it was helpful. And then Melinda
Okay.
added some more context in the chat that I can also read real quick. Students experiencing homelessness do not need to complete the free and reduced lunch form, just like you were alluding to, Christina. They are categorically eligible to and should, oops, they're lost right there, and should be identified and provided meals automatically. Sometimes we catch kids by using the forms, but they're not required. So free and reduced meals remain in place 30 days into the next school year. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
All right.
So another point on that too, that I would say that ties back into identification too, is check for siblings. Because if you have kids who are attending, one's in a middle school, one's in a high school, one's in an elementary school, then sometimes we'll end up identifying one of the kids, but not the kids at the other two schools. So I would suggest you always check for siblings. And sometimes because parents don't know that you all are there and as a resource, they will go ahead and fill out that form. And so that's a quick and easy way to realize, oh gosh, we have siblings. We need to check on them too. Okay, so I do want to give you some additional measures of housing stability too, because especially with the last couple of years, then things have just been so nuts that it's a little bit hard to tell what's happening and what the economic impact and climate in your community is. So one of the things that I have on here is obviously the unemployment rate. Fantastic news that in 2 years' time, you guys went from 16.3 to 4.1% as your unemployment rate. Obviously, you're doing some very significant rebound from the last couple of years. I want to tell you about the underemployment rate too, though, because people are mostly familiar with that 16.3 and the 4.1. That's the quote unquote official unemployment rate. But the thing about that is that there are actually there's a total of 6 different unemployment rates, I believe. It's either 6 or 8. And U6 is the underemployment rate. The official one is U3. So U6 looks at a longer period of time. It looks at a year over time. And it looks at not just the people who are unemployed, but those people who are underemployed. And that's a very significant issue among people who are experiencing homelessness. You can have someone with a master's degree that's working a minimum wage job, for example. And different things like that will happen that then, people take jobs because it's a job and they need a job. But it's not necessarily enough to pay their bills, and it's not necessarily a good alignment to their skills and potential earning power. And so it's also really helpful to look at that. And what you'll notice is it's more than twice the unemployment rate. So that can be a good indicator for you too, in terms of what's happening in your community. I know there was a community near me that there was an automaker. That was for some reason really hard for me to say just now. An automaker. It was a factory. They moved their factory. And so all of a sudden we had folks who had previously been able to very easily afford their lifestyle who now were underemployed. And so that can be a good indicator for you too, in terms of what's going on and what you should prepare your schools for. the other thing that can be, so your April rank too, by the way, I'll just tell you, your April rate rank was 40th. Unfortunately, in this case, lower is better. And so that gives us a hint as to why you guys would struggle with some homelessness in your state. I know that question has come up before about, well, why is it that we do have so many homeless students in our state? And there's been some pushback on that, like, oh, liaisons, you're just being crazy with some of this. You're identifying kids who don't really qualify. And this is some of what it comes down to, is this is unemployment, underemployment. And then the next thing that you see on your screen, which is the out of reach report, which is the cost of housing in your state is really quite high. Now, the fantastic thing that I get to say that I never, ever, ever get to say is your housing wage actually went down. You guys dropped from 7th in the state, in the country, to 6th, and it's over $1 an hour in terms of how much your housing wage dropped. So that's absolutely fantastic. I never ever get to say that. Your renter income actually went up. Again, I never ever get to say that. However, there's a lot of variation. So if you're in King County, if you're in Snohomish County, you guys are sitting at, for example, an unemployment rate of below 3%. However, Ferry and your rate is closing in on 11%. And some of your other counties, you guys have been hovering around 8%. And so these are real issues in terms of where you'll see kids coming from, and can, again, help you kind of identify some of that. In terms of your housing wage too, it has gotten so much better, which I never ever get to say, but it's only going to make a 4-hour difference in how many hours a week a person would have to work. So you've still got this really high number of hours a week that a person would have to work. Some of these too are not just about, and we can go ahead and switch to the next slide, but some of these things too are not just about helping you figure out how many kids that you should be identifying, but some of these are about stereotype busting and myth busting and awareness raising, because we have so many ingrained stereotypes about why it is that families become homeless, that some of that information I just shared with you can be used to break down those myths and open up people's minds in terms of approaching families and who might actually be homeless. So these, again, the first 2 bullets on each of these sections are the national numbers. So if I look at different subgroups of students who are experiencing homelessness, if I look at all students who have an IEP, that's 14% for the entire country. If I look at homeless students specifically, it's 19%. And then for you guys in your state, about 21% of your students have IEPs. And so you'll see that you guys are actually above those markers for each of your subgroups. Your students who have IEPs actually went down by about a percentage point from 18-19 to 19-20, but your EL students, that went up by about a percentage point. So that's kind of where you can see some shifts in your population. So when I look at these things with districts or with state administrators, then one of the things that I look at is, are your percentages of subgroups or students in these subgroups, are those really higher, or is it that those are for some reason making it easier to identify the kids, and so we're predominantly just identifying those kids? So for example, sometimes I'll look at a school district's data with them and they are literally only identifying students who are unaccompanied homeless youth. There's just no way that's all of your students in your district. Even if you do for some reason have a higher number of students who qualify as unaccompanied youth, maybe you actually have a shelter in your community and so that drives that number up for you. The likelihood is that you still have students who are with their families and are experiencing homelessness. So again, that's kind of one of those ways that you can get a sense of how your district is doing and how, are you falling outside of the expected parameters? I just saw the time and I know that I do need to speed up, so I'll watch my words a little closely. I did have to go back to school year 18-19 for this. We do have your 2021 data. I think we do, unless you guys had a waiver this year. Now that I'm thinking that you guys had a waiver this year. Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered. I wouldn't have pulled it anyway because I wouldn't have thought that it was necessarily fair given what last school year was for me to pull this in and for a discussion with you guys. But one of the big takeaway here is that we're constantly, getting these questions about, well, why do we need to have that Title I set aside? Because we already serve our students, and a large number of you probably do serve all of your homeless students with targeted assistance programs or school-wide programs. So then that question comes up. And this is exactly why, is if you look at the US and you look at Washington and you look at homeless students versus economically disadvantaged students versus all students, you see how the numbers are changing, and it's not to the benefit of the students who are experiencing homelessness. And so this is the point that this is the data that I always bring up then when we are having those conversations. There is something else happening there, and we need to look at that to say, what else is it that these students need to get them to the point of success? Because that's a big enough gap that, our natural inclination is to give everybody school supplies, and the kids need school supplies. There's no question about that. They need transportation, no question about that. We've got to do it. But these gaps are big enough that school supplies and transportation alone are not going to get us out of this hole. And so that's why we bring that up. Now, on the flip side, though, we could go ahead and move forward a slide. Perfect, thank you. On the flip side of this, though, I do want to give you some positive messaging too, though. Those numbers obviously were at state and national levels. When we drill down into the individual school buildings, we see some really positive trends. And so in 48 of your schools, homeless students are outperforming the all student group. That's huge. 48 of your schools had homeless kids outperform everybody else. To be included in this count, by the way, your schools had to have at least, or your districts had to have, actually no, your schools had to have at least 10 students who experienced homelessness. So it's not totally skewed just because, you only had one student who was homeless. Same thing in math. You had 30 schools where the homeless students outperformed all students. You can see the counts there for economically disadvantaged students too. So not only are we looking for, well, why is it that students are failing, but we're looking at why is it that students are succeeding, because some of your students most certainly are. We can go ahead. Okay, in terms of another way of looking at achievement, we do want to take a look at the adjusted cohort graduation rates. You can see there that, again, homeless students are not getting to those targets as easily as other student groups. And so then again, we can have some of those conversations. These are usually longer term conversations, and they're a little bit more complex because whereas you can usually impact something like chronic absenteeism pretty quickly, this takes a while to see results, right? And so we have to, this is a great long-term goal and a great long-term conversation with our students. Keep in mind, this doesn't include your students who graduated with a GED or achieved a GED. It is only those students with a regular diploma or an approved alternative diploma for special education purposes. So again, knowing this is an area of opportunity, thinking about your programs, what are you doing now to support graduation? What are others doing? Your state has some work that focuses on foster kids specifically that has resulted in some pretty significant gains. Is there something that we can steal from the foster care points of contact and the work that they're doing? But again, I do want to point out the positive here. I never get to say as much positive stuff as I'm getting to say today. So thank you for letting me do this. You guys have seen a 3 percentage point increase in your grad rate since the last time I did this with you. That's amazing. That's fantastic because you have over 35,000 students. So it's hard to get that number to go up. Okay, in terms of discipline, this is huge. We can see this in a couple of different ways. This is actually, you can see the link at the bottom. This is from a Washington state-based organization. They have a website with lots of data on it. One of the things that jumps out at me immediately about this is that while housed students of all income levels are seeing kind of this roller coaster effect in terms of suspension rates, we're not seeing that with homeless students. They're just kind of, their rate is just creeping up. So that's concerning to me. One of the things that, and it does go to the equity piece, because one of the things that does concern me is sometimes we will see students who are experiencing homelessness get suspended more often than other groups of kids, or we'll see them repeatedly get suspended because that can be an issue too. So one of the places where we can impact this, and we can see some of this impact too, is in your rates of chronic absenteeism. Because chronic absenteeism, when we look at that, it's because you're homeless or you're absent for any reason, including suspensions and expulsions. And so the fantastic news is that your percentage of students who were chronically absent and who were homeless dropped by 15 percentage points between 1819 and 1920. Guys, that is amazing. That is fantastic. Please keep doing whatever you're doing. But please also understand like that intersection with those suspension rates and the discipline piece. We do need to make sure that our suspensions, and one of the things that I would point you back to is your higher rate of special education needs, because I know when I was a state coordinator, I found that the reasons that my students were getting suspended were things that should have been covered by their IEPs and weren't. And so that was a way that we could make an immediate impact. So I just want to bring that up to you too. If you're seeing a high suspension rate, we need, if we can move forward. The only thing I'm going to say about this one, it's more suspension rates. It's just broken down by age. The only thing that I'm going to say is I have a lot of questions about what's happening in middle school, because that rate is so high in comparison to others. We could go ahead and move forward. So I know that you have the here. I'm just going to keep this very short. These are other things to consider. I had to use what data is available to me at the federal level, but because you guys are there with the students, you guys have access to so many more pieces of data than what I have access to. And so you can look at things like, I know one of the things that got me worked up was looking at the gifted and talented program, because when we first looked at data in my state, the participation rate for homeless students was less than half of the state rate. And the person who put the report together for me at the time, he thought that was pretty accurate. And I took great offense because he just called my kids dumb. And so I went down and I talked to a gifted and talented person, and it wasn't about the talents of our students. It was about the way that we operated our programs. And so she was immediately able to identify just by looking at the data, because at that time, most of our kids were being identified in the lower grades, but our gifted and talented programs were in the high school grades. And so it changed how she talked to her programs to make sure that our homeless students had the same opportunities as other students. So that's just an example of different things that you guys can look at. All right. So these are just kind of some questions. One of the things, obviously, we want to make sure that you guys do is, again, take this back, make it real, make it applicable to your work. So just asking some really basic questions like, well, what is it that you want to know about your students? And then figuring out if we have the data to figure that out. And then what action can you take based on our discussion and based on things that this makes you think of, and based on things that Amy is now going to talk to you about, because my next slide is just some resources for you, and I don't need to spend any time on that. I just want you guys to have that.
Thanks, Christina. So I'll go ahead and start by introducing myself. I'm Amy Scott German. I'm a senior data analyst for public reporting with student information at OSPI. Prior to joining OSPI 3 years ago, I was a third grade teacher in each the Highline School District and Tacoma School District. And I'm so glad to be here with you all today. During my portion of today's presentation, we'll be covering quite a bit with the goal of preparing each of you to access and, if needed, correct the data that are submitted to OSPI on students who are experiencing homelessness. We'll begin by defining some key terms that will be used throughout my presentation before reviewing the basic process for reporting student data, identifying different OSPI systems that you can use to access the data that's submitted to us, and then also understanding key steps to verify and correct your data if needed. As a reminder, I'll be moving quickly, but the slides will be available for you afterwards, and you're welcome to reach out to my team. Let's go ahead and move on. All right, Zach, I'm ready. Thank you. All right, so many of you may have already heard about the education data system, which we refer to as EDS. EDS is a portal that contains multiple applications that contain education data. While OSPI maintains the overall EDS system, districts themselves manage who can access which applications in order to align data access with your job responsibilities. All requests for access to the applications that we discussed today must be made through your district data security manager. I'll refer to those as DDSMs throughout today. In the PowerPoint presentation, which again will be shared with you afterwards, there is a link to identify your DDSM if you have questions on the process for requesting access. Every time you navigate to EDS, you'll be required to sign in. This is helpful for security. If you do not currently have an account, you must create one before contacting your DDSM to receive access to any of the applications in EDS. Once you have access, you'll be able to view the applications that your district data security manager has assigned to your account. Today, we're covering two applications, Cders and the Tableau Server. The acronym Cders stands for the Comprehensive Education Data and Research System, and that's the name of Washington's longitudinal K-12 education data warehouse. Districts report data on students experiencing homelessness through Cders. Each district has at least one Cders district administrator who is responsible for timely and accurate reporting to OSPI. The Cders application in EDS contains helpful reports that allow school and district staff like you to access the data sent to OSPI. In order to access those reports again, you will need to request Cders report viewer user roles from your DDSM. The second application we'll be reviewing is the Tableau Server application in EDS, also referred to as the Tableau Secure Data Portal, or sometimes just as Tableau. It's a data analytic and visualization tool available to school and district staff to review data collected by OSPI. Today, we're focusing on student data available to you through the Tableau Server. For student data, there are two different types of visualizations. We have our public reporting review tools and data visualizations by topic. These will correspond to two different folders in the student folder on the Tableau Server. And if you're not following yet, don't worry. I'll show you how this looks in the actual application in just a few minutes. Public reporting review tools offer districts a chance to review data before OSPI makes it publicly available through the report card or through our other federal reporting requirements. On the other hand, data visualizations by topic offers tools that are specifically designed to help schools and districts improve supports and develop innovative policies to address student needs. As with Cders, accessing the Tableau server and EDS requires that your DDSM assigns you a specific role. In this case, you'll want to request a role that's called the Tableau Secure Data Portal Student Interactor. All right, that was a lot of terms, but now let's briefly discuss how data is reported to OSPI. Go ahead and click one more time. All right, so districts gather information such as if a student was identified as experiencing homelessness using their local practices and then enter it into the student information system of their choosing. Student information systems are sometimes referred to as SISs. These are software and they're usually from a third-party vendor designed to help schools track and manage their data. After that happens, data is sent from the SIS to OSPI through Cders. OSPI processes the data and stores it in secure servers. And then the data is used in reports, data dashboards, and in applications such as Tableau. All right, now, we're going to start by taking a look at Cders. And there's several reports that provide district and school staff a mechanism to verify the data that's sent to OSPI through Cders. For today's presentation, we'll be taking a closer look at the district student attribute enrollment report in Cders application and EDS. This report provides information on the number of students experiencing homelessness that were enrolled at any point during the school year. The data is based off of information that your district sends to OSPI. Next, I'll show you how you can actually access this information. To view these reports, you will need to select Cders from the View My Applications screen in EDS, and then select your organization. From there, you can select Reports from the top menu. We're going to take a look at District Student Attribute Enrollment again. And to reach that report, you'll select Enrollment from the top menu and the report's name on the left menu. After you've made these selections, you'll be prompted to make some choices before the report can provide you with data. It allows you to select different school years and organizations like a school or district. And then you'll be prompted to select from a list of student attributes. Since we're interested specifically in accessing data for students experiencing homelessness, we'll select Homeless Students form from the list. You'll then be asked if you want to produce an unduplicated count. Always select yes before running the report. And then finally, you'll have the option to select between two display options. As you can see here, selecting the summary option provides you with a file that includes the count of homeless students broken out by race and ethnicity, and further split by gender. This is a great option if you're really looking for those aggregate counts rather than data on individual students. On the other hand, if you're interested in seeing a list of students reported to Cders as experiencing homelessness, go ahead and select the student details. This will provide a list like you see above that contains student level data. As a reminder, and with any student level information, please remember to follow the appropriate FERPA guidelines when handling or sharing this sensitive information. But just like that, you have data that you can use. Let's go ahead and move on to the Tableau Server application to explore some additional tools. So as we talked about earlier, Tableau is a data visualization tool that districts can use to access two different types of visualizations that contain student data visualizations by topic, and public reporting review tools. In the picture shown right now, there are two types of visualizations correspond to the two folders in the application. This allows for easy access and use. In order to arrive at the page, you'll log into EDS, navigate to the View My Applications, select Tableau Server, and then click the icon for Secure Data Portal. These folders are contained within the student folder. We're going to take a look at a dashboard from each of the different folders to get an idea of what's in each. So the first visualization available to you is a public reporting review tool. It's a visualization that districts and schools can use to verify data that OSPI plans to make available publicly. After selecting this folder, you'll see several data visualizations available to you. The workbook we're exploring today is called District Preview Report Card October 1st Enrollment. This workbook provides districts with a review of enrollment data on all subgroups OSPI reports on our state report card. That includes race, ethnicity, gender, low income, students experiencing homelessness, and several more. It's important to note that for the purposes of report card, we report enrollment using what we call an October 1st count date. This means that enrollment counts are based on students enrolled in your school or district on that first business day of October of that year. So if a student enrolls in your district on November 1st, they will not be included in this count. However, some of the visualizations in this dashboard do include filters that allow you to view all students, regardless of if they were enrolled on October 1st or not. Enrollment data is useful for identifying the stability of student counts over time. So let's take a closer look by selecting the workbook, and it would always open up in a new tab on your browser.
What question real quick, Amy?
Yeah.
Lori from KSD said she doesn't see the folder.
So that would be something to work with your district security manager for, to make sure that you have the user role needed to see the secure data portal.
Okay, thank you for the information.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you that are watching and taking this all in, if you're like me, I'm one that likes to learn as I do. And I know that this is a lot at some point, and I personally wouldn't be able to keep up with it, but that is totally fine. It's kind of the constraints that we have. With that being said, just know that one, you have access to the PDF for all the slides. And then two, in probably 3 or 4 weeks, we should have this posted so you can rewatch this to really slow it down as much as you need, if you need to. But I know some people like Lori are doing this as we go through. So thank you. And I will advance the slide for you.
Thanks, Zach. So as you open a workbook within the secure data portal, you may notice that most of our workbooks have several visualizations. These are each called dashboards. They can be navigated using the tabs near the top of the screen. Today, we're going to take a look at the Start Here dashboard. So similar to what we just saw in Cders, you're going to need to make a few selections before you find the data that's of interest to you or your program. In this case, you'd want to select the organization names that you're interested in viewing from the school name filter. And then to view data for an entire district, you would select district total as the school name. We would then make selections to disaggregate by homeless, and this will bring up counts and percents of students reported as experiencing homelessness and not experiencing homelessness for the most recent school year. Currently, we're displaying the 21-22 school year. Down below, we have a line graph that includes the same information, but it has a trend showing data going back to the 2014-15 school year. Examining trend data really helps us to identify any substantial shifts in the current year relative to what we'd expect based off of prior reporting. This is especially helpful when verifying the accuracy of data sent to OSPI. And since Tableau is a newer tool for many of you, as we saw in the poll earlier, I'm also going to do some quick tips on using the Tableau application. One thing that we find really helpful is something referred to as a tooltip. As you can see in the picture above, it's really challenging to decipher the actual student count based solely on that trend line. However, if I hover over any data point, in this case, school year 2016-17, a tooltip displays. These provide helpful context of additional information for each of the visualizations. Here we see the actual student count in the tooltip, as well as the percentage of total enrollment in organization. So after you review student counts, you might actually want to access student lists, similar to what was possible in the Cders report as well. To do this, you would simply navigate to one of the other visualizations in the enrollment workbook using the top tabs. Here, we're going to go to validate student data. These dashboards are linked, so the organization that you last selected should populate on this dashboard as well. But if you're hoping to validate student data for a different school or different district, you can do so using the organization filters in the Show Filter Options menu. You can also filter by various programs and grade level. Today, we're focusing on students experiencing homelessness. So we would want to use the ever homeless. So that's, again, if at any point during the school year, a student was reported as experiencing homelessness, they would be part of this program or characteristic. And after making those selections, you'll see a student list display on the page. Here I've included the column names at the bottom of the slide, but no actual student data as we want to protect student privacy.
Two questions popped up. I know you mentioned the first one a little bit earlier, but could you tell us again, if you don't have access to Tableau, who should we contact?
Yes, that will be your district data security manager, and the link to look up who that is for your district is included in the slides.
And then can you re-show where the disaggregate data is found? I'm just seeing overall enrollment in the schools is what Sarah said.
Overall enrollment in the schools. Sarah, could you provide a little more context on that?
Feel free to unmute if you're comfortable, Sarah, and if not, then you can throw it in the chat as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't know I could. I only see like students enrolled. Like I can't disaggregate any of this data. I don't know where I would be able to do that. My only filter options are grade level or school.
So that would be another question for your district security manager. You might need to request a details role.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
And then Sarah, or anybody else for that matter, if you reach out to the people that she just suggested, if you're still having trouble, feel free to reach out to me and I can help you, point you to the right people in order to help you get the answers you need down the line. All right, next slide.
Okay, thanks. So after reviewing a student list, it's probably likely that you'll want to download it so that you can use it for future reference or for bringing it to other people in your organization. Tableau makes this very easy to do. You would select any part of the visualization and then use the download button on the top right corner of the screen. In the pop-up window, you'll select data. And then a second pop-up window will then display a sample of the data. For most purposes, you'll want to select the full data option, which will then save your data as a CSV, which can be used in Excel. Okay, so now we're going to pop over to the other folder within the District Secure portal. This is within the data visualizations by topic subproject, which are focused on specific topic areas, such as students experiencing homelessness. These visualizations are a great tool to use when evaluating your program or local policies to identify opportunities to strengthen supports for students. The tool you all are most likely to be interested in using is called Students Experiencing Homelessness. This tool displays key measures for students experiencing homelessness, including enrollment, like we saw in the previous workbook, but also assessment, growth, graduation, regular attendance, dual credit participation, ninth graders on track, and discipline. These are all reported on the report card as well, but this puts them all in one place specifically for students experiencing homelessness. The other one that we've included within this workbook is the night residences of students experiencing homelessness. Similar to the last tool, there are several tabs here, or dashboards, many of which correspond to the measures that we just covered. I know I'm moving fast. As a reminder, please reach out to us or review this PowerPoint for future information. But I wanted to quickly walk through a potential process that you might use to verify the data to OSPI, whether it's correct or incorrect. So the first step would occur in Tableau, where you can use the visualizations to examine historical trends. This can help to identify substantial deviations in current year versus previous. Substantial deviations likely indicate that there was a problem with either the collection or the data that was submitted to Cders. If you identify that there's a substantial deviation from your historical trend, refer to Cders for step 2, where you can then pull a list of students to verify against your local student information system. Once you have that list, you would move on to step 3, which would be using your SIS to identify if all the students are being reported to Cders. So for example, if a student is in your SIS but is not reported to Cders, or is reported to Cders but not in your SIS, you would contact your SIS manager or your district Cders administrator, and they would help you determine the appropriate next steps to resolve the discrepancy between the two systems. After your district Cders administrator has resubmitted accurate and current data to Cders, you would then go back to Cders to confirm that the data is correct on your end, before looking back to Tableau to evaluate and improve the supports for students experiencing homelessness. I know this was a lot of information, so let's talk about some of the resources that we have to support your work in this. So this slide is a recap of who to contact and where to look for specific questions related to student data. Particularly for thinking about Tableau support, please don't hesitate to reach out to student information. We're here and happy to help answer your questions. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back off to Zach.
Thank you so much for the information. We have about 7 minutes left that we can open up to questions for either Christina or Amy. If you would like, you can feel free to unmute and ask them there, or you can throw them in the chat. While I'm waiting or potentially fielding questions, I do have one last thing that I'm going to drop in the chat real quick. And it's a link to a Microsoft form that I'm asking participants or attendees here today to fill out. It's 3 questions. It should take less than 1 minute to complete. Responses are anonymous. The information you're going to provide or you provide in answering these questions will help guide me in future trainings. So 1 second as I throw that in. And then again, if you have questions, please feel free to pass them our way. This is the time.
Can you go back a slide so we can see who our district administrator is and copy that link?
Absolutely. You seeing it?
Yes, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so in the chat now, I just put in a Microsoft form, a link to a Microsoft form. The first question, if you open it up, you'll see it asks for, is there a specific day that would work best for you all to attend trainings? I just choose Wednesdays because where in the district I came from, it used to be a short day. There's no real rhyme or reason. I know Fridays are typically not one that people enjoy. I know that Wednesdays is not exclusive to everybody for being a short day, but if I can get a day that is stands out as the best for people to receive trainings, I could try to schedule them in the future on those days. And then the other 2 questions are regarding this training today, if there's something you'd like us to focus in more in the future. And then the third question is, I think, topics. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to the last slide. And again, I know we mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it for a third time. The PDF is in the chat, available for anybody that would like to view all the content that we went over today. And then 3 or 4 weeks, hopefully, I should have this video posted to the OSPI, the the McKinney-Vento team site if you'd like to revisit it and slow it down. If you're like me, I typically revisit videos and we'll watch them and go through step by step. Shannon says, Amy, could you list the roles that we needed to ask our EDSMs for access for Cders and Tableau in order to report? I think I need them all. Thank you.
Yes, I'll go ahead and drop those in the chat.
Cool. And then while Amy is answering Shannon's question, the only other thing that I have, oh, go ahead, Melinda.
Hey, Amy, I've got a quick question for you because as the sort of the steward here at OSPI to look at this information and help districts with it, we occasionally have districts that are confused because they will look in report card and they will see a different number of homeless students reported than what we submit to US Department of Ed for our final count of homeless students for the entire school year. And those discrepancies between the two can sometimes be confusing. When I've asked about that in the past, I've been told that the business rules for report card are different than what we send in to US Department of Ed. Are you able to just touch on that briefly to help clarify for our participants why sometimes the numbers aren't the same?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Melinda. That's a question we get pretty often. So you might see differences for what's reported on report card versus elsewhere because report card is really a point in time collection. So we're thinking about on that October 1st date, which students were enrolled. And so if we're looking at students over the course of a school year, those who maybe started in a district at the beginning of November, they wouldn't be included in report card reporting. We do refresh report card throughout the year. So with a spring refresh, we would take any student who was enrolled on October 1st. And then if at any point leading up to that refresh, they were reported as homeless, they would then be included in that grouping. But my understanding is that the federal collection is thinking about students enrolled across the entire school year and not just on that October 1st point in time.
Thanks, that's helpful. That's a question that we get quite frequently, and sometimes it's hard to explain that to folks. So if the question comes up again, I'm sending them directly to you, Amy.
Absolutely, feel free.
We have one additional question. Janaea said, is there a way to only pull the unaccompanied McKinney-Vento youth from Cders?
Let me go ahead and copy that question into my to-do list for the day, and we can follow up directly with you, Janaea.
Thank you. Antonio just dropped a question in. Would students who are qualified for MV services by 2 different districts by October 1st be counted for both districts?
They would only be counted for the district in which they're enrolled on October 1st. So if they were enrolled in one district in September, they would not be counted in the October count for that.
Got it. Thank you.
Can I add to that a little bit, actually? So just so that's for the report card purposes, but then again, going back to Melinda's question, which was brilliant, because it does definitely come up a lot, is you would see that student included in the report that goes to the US Department of Education for both districts. And it comes down to the difference between the purpose of your report card versus the purpose of the data collection for ed. So just wanted to add a little bit on there that it depends on what you're looking at.
Thank you, Christina. So much good stuff. I appreciate both Christina and Amy taking the time to be here today and share their knowledge with us. I appreciate the questions that people are dropping in, because I know that oftentimes questions are not unique to one person. Other people might have them, so I appreciate that. The only other thing I have before we go is just a quick reminder. If you're seeking clock hours, you're going to want to complete the course evaluation in PD Enroller. The lead time I'll give myself for attendance verification of that is around 5 to 7 days. Once that evaluation is complete and attendance is verified, you'll receive those clock hours. And then with that, we are done for today. So thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to be here. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. And if we don't see you before summer break, enjoy your summer break. Thank you.